Good
Right,
morning,
Larissa,
Carmel.
I have to.
Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning.
Once again, Much More Than Words is back having conversations that matter. And this morning I am talking with Carmel Batson in Australia. This series of interviews has really taught me an awful lot. I knew very little about if you like, the deaf community, deaf and coda communities. And my journey is one I'm going to be sharing with people to increase awareness around what we can all do. Because to me, inclusion in every area of difference is all of our responsibility. Carmel, I never know whether to say because I have family in New Zealand and I'm always, good morning, good evening, what way round is it? But for us, it's good morning because we're here. But hello, you are welcome and thank you for being here.
Hello, and hello is the same. We would do the same thing. And good morning. We would sign good morning if we need to with our communities, depending on where we come from. But, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
And just tell me a little bit because obviously we're fast tracking people's backgrounds in order to place them in context for these interviews. I know you and Catherine, thank you for signing for us today. Uh, just you're in Australia. What
Yes.
give me an insight into your career history and to where you are today and why all of this matters as much to you as it does to Catherine and other coders.
Okay. I'm the eldest daughter of Stan and Myra Batson, who passed away in the last 3 to 5 years, both of them. So we've lost them, which is huge in our family and huge for Australia. Uh, both of my parents were very strong advocates for education and access to the world, whether that be through technology, whether that be through language, whether that be through interpreters, building community around access. My parents, my mother was from Liverpool. Hello to Liverpool. My father was from country Victoria. Those two things brought with them a connection to community that relied very much upon small communities. And how do communities grow but through communication and language? So that's where I came in. When I was born, I was born talking, apparently, didn't stop, still haven't. Most of my friends and family would say the same thing. My career has been very varied. I started off in medicine and nursing, went through teaching, went into adult education. I've gone full circle, and I realised later in my life that it was about gathering language. The reason I did that was I needed to understand what English was saying to me as a child from a deaf family. I didn't always understand the language that they were asking my parents to communicate in. So I had to go and find out what that meant. So I needed to understand medicine. I needed to understand the law. I needed to understand governance. And I needed to understand how children accessed education. All of that has led me to where I am now. So it's a very confusing kind of story to try and summarize in a very short time, but that is probably the short version. How about that? Would that work?
Well, it really does, and one of the things that I see increasingly is that coders, children of deaf adults, are so often the bridge between two worlds. And from really just the little summary that you've just given very ably, is that
Thank you.
in many different settings, you've been trying to see what the links are, what the commonality of language, and in gathering that language that not only is is prevalent in each of those communities, it then comes together as the common language between deaf and hearing, if I've
Yes,
listened correctly there.
definitely. Yes,
So it
definitely.
touches on identity. You in that journey were also discovering your own identity. Where did you sit in all of this?
Absolutely. Very true. It's been in Australia. It's been an incredibly strange journey in lots of ways, because we didn't have interpreters when I first entered. I was 21 when I went into the deaf community as a paid community worker at the time. We weren't called interpreters then. We didn't have interpreters. Interpreters became, and that's only 40 years. So we're not talking a long time. We're just talking, 30 to 40 years since we have tried to find a way legally to increase access. And that's always been a conversation that my parents and myself and our families and elder generations of deaf before my parents talked about. Access is always been the important part. Is like, how do we understand what people want of community if we don't have access to information, to education, all of those things? So that's where that's come from. And then, of course, I went into working with people across the world. And one of the things that always comes up for me is that young deaf families, both deaf parents, having hearing children, and 20 years ago, the way forward was cochlear implant. And that caused a huge rift in community around whether or not we should be teaching language, whether or not we should be improving technology. All of these issues changed the face of how community worked. And in days gone by, communities worked, before we had telephones and access by SMS, we had to go and visit people door to door. We'd be in the car. Well, my father would drive around and visit deaf people to make sure that community knew what was going on. So now I meet bosses who say, how am I going to employ a deaf person? And I say, well, what's his job? He's going to be driving a truck. You can send him an SMS message. He'll be able to respond. He's not incapable. He has a telephone. He's gone through school. He's been educated. He's got a driving license. He's got access to all these things. We just have to think differently. So I think a lot of the time we limit ourselves with the possibility of where people can go simply because technology terrifies us and it stops us from growing. And in some ways, we lose our humanity in it.
And I suppose also, just picking up from what you're saying there, is what also limits us is our belief that the way we saw situations before is the way that determines how to assess the potential now. And yet everything is changing.
Everything's changing. And young people now, young deaf people are not going to put up with this rubbish anymore. They're like, I'm going. I want to go there. I want to do that. And, more power to them. And so they should. And the same thing applies for coders. I look at coders who have been entrapped in relationship to an old system that actually doesn't serve them anymore. It doesn't serve their parents, because there's a system now in place that parents can be parents to children who just want love and affection and learning from their parents. All of those things that we've, and many of us grew up with love and affectionate and educated deaf parents, and many people didn't. So we have to be clear about that. There's two worlds that we walk all the time. But the one thing that is always paramount in the deaf community that I know and I respect and that I look at around the world is it takes a village. We can't bring up children by ourselves. Everybody's got to be involved, and everybody's got to be vigilant and keeping our eye out all the time, looking for the opportunities to increase awareness. And the one thing I say to coders over and over again is that you and I are the same. We have an understanding of two languages. Now, whether you come from a migrant family, you have an understanding of two languages. There is no reason to be ashamed of your first language. And Australian Indigenous people all over this country are waking up to that they have a first language and they should be strong in their first language. It's the same as coders. Be strong in your first language. English comes. You'll learn English. You have to learn English. The same as we teach deaf children, you have to learn English, but you've still got your first language.
Yeah.
ABC is English. First language, deafness, Auslan, go for it. First language, Irish Sign, go for it. But ABC is English.
And I think something worth picking up on without going into COVID, let's hope that we've all learned to live with COVID.
Oh, COVID. What was that? Did we go
well,
there?
Exactly. Let's kind of leave it there. But
Yes.
the phrase that comes up with different people that I am speaking to, thanks to Catherine connecting us, is it takes a village to raise a child. And within, if you like, deaf and coders creating communities within communities, what COVID has taught us more than anything else, I hope, is we are all connected.
Very true. So
And
very
I'm
true.
just acutely aware, communication is where my heart is, in story weaving, storytelling, helping people to tell their stories, is that the greatest story is one of humanity. And how we've
Absolutely.
allowed people to be separated and life to be seen in silos is ridiculous. We've seen this with Ukraine. We've seen it with COVID, Brexit. Let's not get into politics. But if we have learned nothing else, it's a wider community. We are all connected. It really is.
I tell you, Jane, it's fascinating when you say that. We've just been through an election here in Australia, and we've changed governments for a number of reasons, which we won't get into. But when you look at all of those things, the thing that seems to be driving the world at this moment is this sense of fear around losing our sense of individuality. Yeah. And I find it fascinating that if you spend time with 5 and 6 year olds, or 4 and 2 year olds, as I am currently, their world is about creation. Their whole world is about teach me how to learn, teach me what I can make, teach me what I can change in this world. And I find it absolutely fascinating that when you look at 4 and 2 year olds, that's their whole modus operandi. And yet when we look at 40 and 50 year olds, we're all terrified of moving into change. And yet grandparents around the world have children that they're playing with and they're teaching them to be creative. It's a fascinating thing. But the more we separate the world into little silos, the further away we get from creating young people who have got this incredible capacity to change the future. And I believe it 100%.
And it's a thirst, isn't it? That they want to learn, they want to make change happen. We've been talking for years, be the change, we can all go into coaching mode and pull out all of the expressions. But really, it's as well as different legislations being introduced to facilitate, whether it's access to education or different.
Absolutely.
Jane,
I'd also say, if you get a chance to interview a 5-year-old beautifully educated signing deaf person, you will understand if those parents have taught that deaf child to sign, those kids will tell you exactly what they want. And
Catherine,
they
we've noted
are
that,
very, very
Catherine.
capable. They are very, very capable of telling you what they want, and they're very, very capable of asking you questions.
Okay.
It's all about building language. Doesn't matter what the language is. Greek, German, Russian, Italian, I don't care. Teach the language you need to teach. Teach your home sign language. Teach your family. Teach everybody. Because the more we all learn to drop the barriers around communication, the better we'll be.
Yeah. And it's interesting, one of the things that you touched on, and I want to come back to, is whether it's intergenerational learning. And, we touched very briefly on grandparents to
Absolutely.
Parents. And one of the key things that I would like to leave with people, and we'll keep coming back to this, we've looked at the lens through which we're seeing each other, learning to live with each other, connect with each other. The lens is changing, and hopefully the silos will start to break up. And Catherine, we will go back and look at this whole thing of talking with younger ones. But it's the message, I suppose, coming back to advice as a coda, that you would give to younger parents today. So that's an interesting thing that we can move on to in subsequent interviews and conversations with young ones, because they are the future. As you say, they're not going to accept being excluded. And equally, the younger ones who are in the hearing world are embracing change far quicker, and diversity and inclusion, than the older generation. So the future does lie with the younger ones. But in the meantime, when children are younger, it's the parents who take the lead. So if you like, we're the old ones now, I suppose. And I hate to say that. I really hate to say that. But for deaf parents,
you know what? I actually don't mind saying that. I think there's some I think it's a really important point to get to a point in your life where you recognize that, you know what, we've got a few miles under the belt, and we might have learnt a few things. And I suppose for myself, I would never tell a parent how to raise a child. It's not what I come from, and I've never been told or taught that. What I have learnt is that the more conversation you have with other people who come from that area. So it's a bit like if you don't know about deafness, go and find out about deafness. I know I've found a lot of hearing parents who have a deaf child don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. It's go and talk to deaf parents. Go and talk to them. They will talk to you about what's going on for them. They will happily exchange their experiences. I think it's really fascinating. I remember years and years ago, someone said, why is it that nobody asks us about educating deaf people when we grew up with deaf people? And I used to think to myself, well, that's a really interesting question. Nobody asked us because we don't have the experience. I'm not a deaf person. I'm a coda. I'm a hearing child of a deaf family. And I have always, my world is always going to be tainted by both hearing and deafness. And we have two different parameters within that. So always, always, always ask a deaf parent, talk to deaf parents, and talk to the older deaf parents. If you're a young deaf parent, talk to older deaf parents. They've been through it. They know what it's like to bring up hearing children. They'll be able to tell you. It may not always be 100%, but they'll tell you what they know. And talk to coders, because coders will give you a perspective. Mm-hmm. And we can only give perspectives. because we're always going to be impacted by both our hearing side and our deaf side. Does that make sense?